hearing me okay? Yes, you are. Excellent. So thank you for that fantastic introduction. I must take you with me to other places in the world when I go. And these photographs remind me of myself quite a few years ago, so it's kind of interesting. So first of all, I'd like to thank you and the organisers of this fantastic event for inviting me to come here to India, to Bangalore, to be with you on this important journey. And I've found it a really interesting week, and so full credit to Shash and the team that put this together in such a short period of time. Shash said to me in, I think, December that he was going to do something in February, and I can tell you, when we do events like this in the UK, we need about 6 months to get them together. So well done to everybody who's been involved with it, I think. So, now, I'm not an expert in sustainability or climate change. I guess if I have a superpower, it's helping organisations to think through how they might go about changing to new models of working, and that's predominantly what we've done over the years around the world. And it's not easy. Change is not an easy thing to do. Even if you imagine that you want to change, imagine that you want to lose some weight or do something like that. How many people have had a go at losing some weight and they've got into it really enthusiastically, only to be sort of derailed at a fairly early stage in the process? So even when we want to change, it's actually not an easy thing to do. And in the world that we're working in at the moment, I think change is something we're going to do. And I think ultimately we're going to need probably the biggest change program on the planet in order to get ourselves out of this situation. So just returning to a couple of things that Shash was saying, the Paris Accord, which was in 2015, was a coming together of many nations, and they concluded that they needed to reduce the world's carbon emissions by about 43% by 2030 in order to do that, in order to keep us on track for net zero in 2050. And I don't know about you, but I hear all the stories, I see the politicians, I hear the rhetoric, but I worry desperately that they simply aren't moving quickly enough. There are an enormous number of people and organisations in the world that would rather keep things the same way as they are today, because they're so invested in the things that they're making cars, internal combustion engine, fossil fuels. They're a part of everyday life. Changing from that is expensive and it's difficult, and there are many people who don't really want that to happen very quickly. So I worry that the politicians and the bureaucrats and the systems are simply not going to be able to do the things we need to do as quickly as we need them to be done. And so I think people in the room here, I see you as being important ambassadors, if you like, for the kind of changes that we need to make in terms of the way we go forward. And of course, the thing is, as we were saying before, although buildings represent a relatively small amount of carbon emissions, the other aspects about getting to work and living and so on, they all contribute quite significantly to the way carbon is generated. So we have an important part to play, I think, in the room. We have, we're people who are involved in work and workplace and all the things that go with it. So we have a little more influence, I think, than many other people in society. Now here in India, I think, just to pick up Shash's point, I think you have a very interesting moment. Your GDP is growing, even though the last 2 or 3 years have been a little bit different because of the pandemic and recessionary forces and so on. But if you look at the graph, it's quite clear that you're on an upward trend. And certainly talking to people here in Bangalore, particularly at the heart of the IT and the software industry, there's clearly going to be a lot more growth in this nation. And I think Shash was telling me, I think that typically here you each year add about another 40,000 square feet of, 40 million square feet of office space to the portfolios of the organisations that exist here. And that's an awful lot of office space, and it's an awful lot of carbon that's being generated in the process. So I think you have an interesting moment here to decide whether you want to grow your economy in the way that maybe the USA did and more recently China have done, consuming more of the Earth's resources and generating more and more carbon, or you do the more intelligent thing, and that is to grow your economy in a sustainable way, and you do it in a way which is culturally in tune with you as a nation. And I think that is the choice you have to make at the moment, and I think everybody needs to voice their opinions in that. Now, of course, some of the things that go along with that are not so easy, and I'll pick up on a couple of those as we go through. Now, this brings into play, the subject of hybrid working, because, of course, during the pandemic, pre-pandemic, everybody would get up in the morning. Certainly, if you're in London or New York or somewhere like that, you'd probably get up in the middle of the night. You'd take your car to the station. You'd get on a tube or a train or something, and you'd go and spend some time incarcerated in a building, doing the stuff, and then you would do the same thing on the way back. And that was a tiring experience. It was consuming of carbon. Buildings generate a lot of energy, consume a lot of energy, and so on. So I think during the pandemic, of course, we were all instantly taken into a world where we could no longer do that. We all had to get used to working at home. People got used to using computing technology that maybe some of them had never used before, Teams, Zoom, all these sorts of things. We suddenly got used to working in a different way. And we experienced, good or bad, the delights of working in a kind of digital model. Now, some people found that pretty difficult. Younger people, maybe with not so much space, with families, it was a tough time. Maybe other people found it quite positive because they were able to focus on things in a way that they hadn't been able to do when they were in an office. An office creates an enormous amount of distraction, and certainly certain personality traits don't find that particularly helpful. So during the pandemic, there were reports of improved productivity, for instance, with people working at home. Now we've come out of the pandemic, of course, whether we like it or not, that was an experience that we all had. And as we've returned from the pandemic, many organisations and many leaders and many politicians were trying to get everybody to come back to the office. And certainly in London and in the UK, we were probably the first out of the pandemic. And so there was this period where everybody thought that nobody was going into the office because they were frightened of contracting COVID. And this was the argument: people are not coming back because they're worried, they're scared, they're frightened. But then a month went by, another month went by. People weren't coming back. People were working, things were moving forward. Gradually people got comfortable to return. But nobody wanted to go back full time. And this continues to be the case. And I think it's also the case in most places in the world where, we have office activity. Certainly in the US, we're beginning to now see that organisations have more space than they need. Now we, in our own way, we have done a thing that we call the AWA Hybrid Working Index. And this is a survey of organisations, and the recent one that we did was about 3 months ago, involving 60-odd organisations, 220 buildings, population of about 250,000 people. And can you guess what the average attendance at offices was that were reported during that? What we asked organisations to tell us for a particular week how many people had attended their offices on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And we asked them how many people are associated with the building, they use it as their base. And we asked also how many desks they had. So can you guess what the average attendance in the office was during that period? And this is back in about sort of October time. What do you think? 50? Anyone say 50? Do I hear more? 20%? Well, let me tell you, it was 29%. 29%. And it was 40%, the peak was 40% on a Wednesday. Now that's pretty profound, really, I think. What it tells me is that most buildings, most organisations have got about twice as much real estate as they actually need. And of course, in order to realise that 50% to use it for something else, you have to start to work in a different way. You have to remove ownership of space. You move to an activity-based model. But nevertheless, there is latent capacity in the system, it seems to me. So the question really is, and just to say also that we did, a number of organisations in India did this, and the data was very similar. The only difference was the average was 32%, so slightly more here. So the question is really whether we can use hybrid working and technology as a means of growing and using that capacity without necessarily building more buildings. And my thesis, and I'm sure a great many people will not love me for this, is that we should stop building new buildings almost instantly, and we should use all of that capacity that we clearly have, and we grow into that capacity, and it's only when we've used that capacity that we should start building new buildings. And when we build those new buildings, we need to build them in a sustainable fashion with materials that are sustainable, and we should design them in a way that they're capable of easy change, and that we don't have to knock walls down and make radical changes in the construction of buildings in flight. We need to design for change. So that kind of change is going to be tough. Change, as I said earlier on, is tough. And it requires people to get on board. And the first stage of getting on board is awareness, really. And I think this is what this whole week has been about, is about helping people to understand the truth about this idea, this need to change, and what the ways of doing that are. I mean, I personally, as I say, I'm not an expert in this field, and I've learned a lot this week, and I'm sure many of you have as well. So I would ask you today to take full advantage, and not just today, but in the future, to try to generate more knowledge and understanding of this subject, so that you can yourselves be ambassadors for this change. I think Lisa Whitehead, who you saw earlier on, my colleague at AWA, suggested a couple of days ago that we needed to get about 25% of the population on board for a change like this. And no pressure, but that's 300 million people for you. So we have to start somewhere in getting more people to know the truth about this subject. And I think, everybody in this room today, I hope you see yourselves as potential ambassadors for that change. And I hope that we in our little way in AWA can help you on that journey. So, linked to that, interestingly, and to try and help with that, it's not good enough just to be aware. You actually have to do something. We are, I think, talking about the biggest change program on the planet. We all have to live our lives differently. We have to make different decisions in business. And we have to take on board a different way of living. And none of that is going to be easy. But the way to do it is, first of all, with awareness and then action. And so, it seems to me that over the next 12, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, we need to take some serious action, because 2030 isn't very far away. I mean, I did some very simple calculations, and it's about, 7 3/4 years or something. So it's 96 months, it's 2,920 days. It's not long, really. So we need action, and as I say, one of the things that we are doing to help on that is that we have, over the years, lots of techniques and skill and capability in helping organisations change, particularly with behaviour. So we have decided to set up AWA India, and I'd like to invite our team to come and join me up on the stage. Where is Shash? Is he disappeared? He's here. So, and I think a big hand for Shash for his hand in this event. Partha Sama as well. Is Partha with us? Here he is. And of course, our good friend who you saw earlier on, Lisa Whitehead. Would you like to join us as well. So this is the leadership of our AWA team here, and of course around the world we have many experts, and using the technology that we've all become accustomed to, we embrace and bring the skills and the knowledge to the fore here as well. So on that basis, this is the team. These are the people you should talk to if you're interested in help in this sort of area. And then on a final note, I'd like to thank you all for coming and really encourage you to make the most of today. But when you leave here, think of yourselves as ambassadors for the world's biggest change. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much. Everybody, let's give a big hand once again.